So I made a post last night about an experience I had in this house. So I decided to compile a bunch of experiences I had into a few posts. First, I'm going to set the scene so that you can all imagine my stories as they are happening. I lived above an Ace Hardware store in Pennsylvania. You walk about 30 stairs to my porch, and there were 2 apartments at the top. Mine, you walk in, and you were immediately in my kitchen. You could either go through the door arch on the left to my living room, or to the right in my laundry room, which was connected to my bathroom, and our real long hallway, which was also connected to the living room at the end. Now, walking down this hallway, you have the blue room to the left, bedroom painted blue, and you had the double doors, which was 2 rooms with a knocked down wall making it 1 room. On the right, you have a bedroom with a bathroom in it. You keep walking straight down the long hallway, and at the very end was a little space that might have been a bedroom with no windows and a huge, creepy attic door. Little things started happening immediately upon moving in. My parents would have phone alarms set to around 3 a.m. that they never set. The AC window units would turn off and on. The temp would be adjusted to super low temperatures. TVs would turn on and be left on until we woke up the next day. We would hear random bumps in the night. The doorknobs would jiggle. I have 2 siblings. At this moment, my younger brother lived in the creepy back room. He loves weird bedrooms, and my sister lived in the double room and I lived in the blue room. I was up until 3 a.m. watching A Haunting on TV and playing on my computer. I am a night owl, so 3 a.m. is just a time to me. I heard someone coming down the hallway and it sounded like heavy boots. I yelled out to my brother and told him to stop screwing with me. I got no answer in reply. So I snuck up to the hallway door to chuck my shoe at him. I chucked it into thin air. Nothing. My brother was sound asleep, so I went and woke my sister up and made her sleep in my room with me. We were laying in my bed watching TV when we heard boots again. We were laying in my bed watching TV, and we heard the boots again. And it got louder and louder until they stopped at my door. She bolted and slept with my parents, leaving me at the mercy of this freaking demon outside my door. I ended up falling asleep. And was fine. One day I got home by myself. I am not sure where my siblings were. I am pretty sure my brother stayed at school for practice and my sister was with friends. My parents were both still at work. At this time, I had the bedroom with the bathroom. The bathroom had a weird built-in crawl space cupboard thing above my door. I walked in and was changing out of my school clothes so I could go out and hang out with my friends. I was changing when I heard the latch on the crawl space. The latch was super old and hard to open. I looked up as I was holding my breath, just staring at it, because the latch had a very distinct sound. After a couple seconds, the door swung open. The bathroom door swung open and my bedroom door swung open. I ran out and called my friend who sat on the porch with me until my parents got home. My best friend spent many nights with me, and this time takes place when I lived in the double room with my sister. Me and my best stayed up until curfew was lifted watching TV with 2 of our guy friends. They walked home as soon as curfew was up, which was like 5 a.m. So at this time, me and her went to my room to lay down. We were laying down and talking when we heard a slight noise. We looked over to this picture on my wall. The picture was pasted to construction paper. It had tape on the top, middle, and bottom. Every single time we started talking, it would peel off the wall little by little. So we stopped to deliberately stare at it when it completely ripped off the wall and flew across the room. We literally trampled each other getting out my door. It was a nice summer day when my mom, me, and my ex-boyfriend We're sitting on the porch, talking, at like 11 p.m. My big door was open and the screen door was shut. My mom and I just finished cleaning the kitchen and decided to sit outside, as per usual. We were the only three at the house at this time, besides my dad, who was sleeping for work the next day. We heard what sounded like silverware being tossed in the sink, like the metallic clank sound, and we all looked inside and saw a man walk through the wall into the laundry room. We got up and went inside to check out the house and noticed a spoon sitting in the sink. A single spoon, when we had just cleaned the kitchen spotless. A couple years into living at this apartment, I got pregnant with my now husband, and we lived in the room with the bathroom. Since he moved in, he would always see this tall shadow person standing next to our couch in the corner. When my daughter was a few months old, we used to put her in her swing at night to help her sleep. It was going about half speed, and when you make the swing go faster by pushing it or slower by stopping it, it would click like it was forced. While I am a light sleeper, and I heard the clanking, so I looked at the swing to check on her, and it was going faster than max speed. I freak out and wake my husband up, and we got up to get my daughter, and it came to a dead stop. Needless to say, she definitely did not sleep without us in that room again. On January 11th, 2018, my brother committed suicide. He had severe depression his entire life and had attempted suicide repeatedly. He didn't have any children or a wife or anything like that either. We were very close, best friends, and even lived down the street from each other. He was 3 houses down, and since the yards were small, we could yell to each other from our driveways. Anyway, he didn't believe in an afterlife, and I didn't know what to believe. And when we were younger, we both made a promise that whichever one of us died first would haunt the other one as much as possible so that we would know there's really an afterlife. I'd had extremely weird experiences as a child, but I wasn't sure if it was my imagination and thought that experiencing as an adult would give me peace of mind. Well, immediately after he died, strange things started happening. It would get especially active during or shortly after dreams of him, too. First of all, our dog, Remy, didn't like him, and she would growl when she saw him. So we had to put her in her crate or another room when he was over. She started growling all of the time at home, while she's normally very quiet. She would stare at random empty spots like the kitchen, a hallway, the wall, and just growl. It was every day for the first few months after he died. Lights also started turning on and off in my house. Doors would open and close. The baby would start giggling and laughing or staring and babbling at nothingness when alone. When I was at work, several times, items would come flying off of shelves at me. But the real kicker for me happened exactly a month after he died, and on the 10-year anniversary of our mother's death, February 11th, 2018. Where I work, there are motion-activated lights. I work midnights, and often there are little to no employees there. On this particular night, almost no machines were running, and there were only 6 employees in the building, including myself. 2 were busy running one machine. The other 3 were busy dealing with a coil that was dropped. I walked off on my own to put bands on stand-up coils of steel. I was over there a while, as there were quite a few. Because it's a very large building, and sometimes there's only a few employees in the building, the lights are motion activated. The lights around me were all off. While I was putting a band on, I noticed a figure walking towards me out of the corner of my eye. The lights along the walkway started to turn on as the figure approached. I didn't immediately turn my head or anything, because I figured that it was probably the supervisor walking over from where the falling coil was at to come check up on me. However, when the figure got closer to me, like 2 car lengths away, I turned to say hi. But suddenly, there was no one there. The walkway is very wide enough for 2 fork trucks, which are much bigger than a regular forklift, about as big as an SUV, to easily maneuver like a 2-way street. There was nowhere for a person to easily duck and hide without having to run for a few moments in either direction, like if a person were walking down the middle of a street. I knew that I hadn't imagined it either, because the lights were all on. I knew it wasn't the people at the machine, because I could hear it running, and they had to stop it if one of them wandered off. So I walked over to the dropped coil, where the supervisor and 2 other employees were. They were all still working on it. I asked the supervisor if he had walked over to check on me, and he said no, and that he'd been there the whole time. He gave me a funny look, but all I said back was okay. I walked over to the bathroom. There's only one woman's bathroom in the whole plant, and it's right by the time clock. I looked over and noticed that it was after midnight now, and now the 10-year anniversary of my mom's death. None of these things scared me. I just thought it was my brother, so I was just calm and would sometimes whisper to him. Hi guys, I hope you are all well. It's my first time posting on this subreddit, so be nice. I assume this was the best place to post this. I've not had many paranormal experiences in my life, but this is one that I cannot explain. And therefore I am asking you guys for your input on what happened. I've always been a bit of a skeptic, probably because deep down I'd rather believe that these things don't exist. Life is complicated enough as it is, if you get me. But anyways, on with the story. I am from a small village in Scotland that is northwest of Glasgow, near Loch Lomond. My family have a small holiday cottage on the Isle of Coll. If you feel like it, you can have a look on Google Maps to get an idea of where it is. My father's mother was born on this island, and her blood can be traced back to the 1600s on that island. The island only has around 200 inhabitants currently, but it is thought that it used to have 1,000 or so. At its longest, it is around 12 miles. At its widest, it is around 3 miles. There are countless stories or folk tales of people seeing unnatural things on this island, seeing glimpses of battles that happened hundreds of years ago, or seeing old workers walking through your farmhouse who aren't really there. You get the idea. Most people live in houses that have been lived in for a very long time, and some energies have been left behind. Our cottage used to be the dairy, cheesery. The barns around the house still have all the slots for where the cows would stay, etc. It is a very old cottage and has had many owners before us. It was last used as a dairy in the 70s. Fun fact, its cheese was once exported in the House of Lords, London. So what happened? When I was around 10, we extended the small cottage into some ruined piggeries that were attached to the end of the cottage. We probably disturbed some old spirits when we knocked through those old walls, but it had to be done. The renovation meant that me and my sister now both had a bedroom each. My bedroom was pretty much empty apart from some bunk beds at the far end away from the door. For the first year or so, I would feel a bit off about the pitch black room when trying to go to sleep. When I was around 12, I saw her for the first time. She was around my age, stood in the middle of my room, a light from across the courtyard beaming in from a slit in my curtain and hitting the side of her face and body. Clear as day, she was there, stood in the middle of my room. As soon as I saw her, I immediately panicked and turned to face the wall. I spent the rest of that night covered in sweat and shaking in fear. I knew what I had seen. I continued to see her every now and again, sometimes 2 days in a row. She eventually became an expected feature in my room, to me. It got to the point where I could peacefully fall asleep with her in the room, because I knew from experience that all she ever did was stand there. She meant me no harm. She was just as much a part of the room as the stonework around her. I had a close friend come out to the island when I was 14. I had not told him about her. Upon going to bed on the first night we were there, I saw her arrive in the middle of the room. I knew he was still awake as we had just been talking. He was on the top bunk, I was on the bottom one. Silence. I didn't say anything, and neither did he. The next morning he seemed a bit off. After probing a few times, he finally admitted that he thought he saw a girl in our room the night before. I was a bit scared by this, but also a bit relieved that someone else had finally seen her. I told him about how I'd been seeing her for years, etc. To me, this was proof that I wasn't crazy, and that this little girl was really there. When I was around 15, I made an effort to communicate with her while she was visible and talk with her through the transition of moving on. Not talking with words, but speaking without talking. Almost pleading her, telling her that she had nothing to fear about moving on. There was no benefit to her being stuck where she was. She walked out of my room through my closed door. That was the last time I ever saw her. My dad was on the boat going to call one day when I was around 15 or 16. A family member of ours had died and was being buried on the island that day. My dad was in the lounge area of the boat and just by chance started speaking with an elderly man who was sat across from him. It turned out to be the guy who owned our cottage back in the 70s and 80s. He sold the cottage to the person who sold it to us. By this point, my dad knew that I had seen this little girl in my room on many occasions. It turns out that this elderly man had a daughter. Unfortunately, she died of TB, tuberculosis, at a young age, around 9 or 10. She used to look after the pigs in the piggeries that we knocked into and renovated. She is buried on Tyree, the island next to Call. My dad didn't say anything to the man when he heard this, but it immediately clicked in his head. This was the young girl I had been seeing. Jump to many years later. My dad brings a psychic out to the island to see what she picks up on. He hadn't told her about the little girl. She is very sensitive to these sort of things and is well known for clearing buildings, smudging, etc. They arrived at the cottage during the daylight. We have never seen the little girl during the day. As soon as our friend walks through the doorway of my room, she freezes and starts talking. She said, "There's been a young girl visible in this room recently, maybe around 10 years old. Is this your son's room now?" "Yes." "Has he ever seen her?" "I'm not sure. I think he has helped her move on, but I'm not sure how. She has moved on." If you guys are interested in this story and the island, then I have plenty secondhand stories I can pass on that would fascinate you. In the Hebridean Islands, we call the gift of seeing the future the second sight. In the 60s and 70s, some of the islanders saw some horrific things before they actually happened. I'm sure those stories would interest you a lot. There are countless stories of people seeing spirits in human form. It is a bit creepy, but very interesting. As I said, this is my first post on this subreddit, so be nice if I broke any rules. Looking forward to hearing some feedback from you guys. Peace and love. X. Before I start, I want to make clear that I don't really know what happened. I don't know if it was something paranormal or a very creepy dude. I just wanted to share it. This happened to me back when I was 16 years old. It was summer, and I was spending my days at our family's home in the countryside. My father always gave me a lot of freedom, so I was used to taking long strolls in the heart of the night. It's a rather small town, and I know most of the residents. I never had a reason to be scared. It was around 2 a.m. and I was talking at the phone to a friend, and jokingly, I said I was going to jump the graveyard's fence and take a look around. I was kinda determined to do it, but my phone's battery died halfway through, and I didn't feel like going on without my friend talking to me. So I decided it was time to go back home and took a shortcut. Now I know this sounds very cliche, right? Taking the dark shortcut instead of going through the civilized world and stuff like that. But you have to understand the situation. It was something I was extremely used to. And as I said, nothing dangerous ever happened in that town. This shortcut is a 2 kilometers road built on the side of a mountain that became pedestrian area after a section of it collapsed under the weight of a truck. After this event, all the lampposts were dismantled, so using a flashlight is mandatory. After a few minutes I was walking, I started hearing someone whistling, and being late at night and on a remote road, I accelerated the pace. It followed me for a good amount of time, and every time I turned my head to see if I could spot his flashlight, I couldn't find anything. Going around without a flashlight can make you fall in the ravine. Then it stopped. I stopped walking too, to check if it was still following, whoever it was. That's when I heard rustling within the bushes. The year before, I had a frightening experience with a boar on that same road, so I turned off the flashlight and tried to stay completely still without making any sound. The classic click of a camera and the flashlight came out from the bushes, and that's when I lost it. I ran until I was out of breath, and still I wasn't near the end of the road. I took a couple of seconds to relax, because my heart was going to explode, and I turned to face the woods. I stopped right in front of a pathway, before I even realized that I was very exposed. I heard quick footsteps coming at me from that small path, so I ran again, but this time, I didn't stop until I was home. After that, nothing really spooky happened. I didn't find a picture of myself on my threshold. No creepy figures stalked me in the night. Nothing came out from the woods. I didn't tell my father about this, in fear that he would restrict my freedom, and I'm glad nothing frightening actually happened afterwards. Otherwise, I wouldn't have the courage to go back to my family's home every year. Sometimes I go on night strolls on that road, but never without a friend or a relative with me. Growing up, I lived in northeastern Arizona, literally about 5 miles south of the Navajo Reservation in Winslow. Naturally, being that close to the reservation, or the res, skinwalkers were a huge topic of conversation amongst the locals, and we all took it very seriously. Stories of personal experiences abounded. I was no different. Well, to start off my set of stories, I was about 9 or so. My family had gone camping in a little spot about 50 miles or so south of a town called Hart Canyon, near Wiggins Crossing, if anyone is interested. We had been there all day, and I was extremely familiar with the area, as we had camped there 20 or so times before. So my parents let me just wander about alone in the woods. This was back in the early 90s. Anyway, I had some G.I. Joes that I had been playing with in the nearby creek, about 80 yards from our campsite. There were not other campers there with us. My mom had called me back to camp for dinner, so I left and ate. played around camp for a while and realized that I'd forgotten my toys back at the creek. So I took a flashlight and headed back that way. I knew right where I had left them, so in no time I found them and grabbed them up. As I was squatted down to grab them on the edge of the water, a sudden urgency that I'd never felt before ran down my spine. I remember feeling frozen because of the fear. Like the little boy on E.T. when the alien comes out of the field for the first time and he's trying to scream for his family. I looked up and pointed my flashlight to the other side of the creek, and about 10 yards down the way, I saw something. At first I thought it was a deer, but it was standing up, so I thought it may be a bear, but it was too skinny and not enough poofy hair. It skunked behind a tree and peered out slightly at me. I seriously was too scared to move. I had just read a bit about Bigfoot for the first time, since it wasn't really popular in my area. I thought for a long time that that's what I saw. I finally had seen enough to gather my wits and scram as fast as I could back to camp. I told my parents, and they kind of dismissed it as my imagination. So I just stayed close the rest of the trip. About 2 years later, I was at my house. I had 2 dogs. They were outside dogs, lived their whole lives in my backyard. One night they went psycho, barking at first at something in the alley behind my house. Then they both started whimpering. I had my window open slightly, and one of my dogs straight up jumped up to the window, frantically chewed through the screen of the window, forced its way into the house, and would not leave the house for 3 days. Another time, when I was about 13, we used to play night games in my town. Mostly, there being nothing much else to do, we would walk around our neighborhood and act suspicious so the cops would come chase us around. And we would run down the alleyways and hop into random folks' backyards to hide. Now it was extremely common to see an intoxicated Navajo or Hopi in the alley, or the street. So it was no big deal to see one in the alley behind my house that night, as we being 2 of my friends and myself, ran from a police car hot on our tail. We saw him plain as day standing in our way. We ran around him and jumped into the nearest yard to hide. We waited for the cop to pass us and hopped back out. Literally about 3 minutes went by. We ran back the way we came, and as we got to the point where the Indian had been, he was gone. Legit. In his place was a coyote sitting there watching us. We ran right past it, feet from it. And anyone who knows coyotes knows they will bail out way before you get close to them. This bugger held his ground and calmly sat and watched us run past him. We all freaked out and stayed inside for a month. My last experience was when I was about 15 or 16. My brother has a girlfriend that lived in a small community south of Winslow called Starlight Pines, about 25 miles-ish. Well, we went to go see her one day, and as we drove out, about 15 miles out, we saw an Indian guy standing on the side of the road, which was quite odd because the res was north of town, and it was rare to see anyone on foot south of town because it's just desert and forest for literally 80 miles. Anyway, we saw this guy. He looked normal enough. Plain old shirt, jeans. We got to our destination and hung out with my brother's girlfriend and her family well into the night when we decided to head back home. Hopped in his truck, a Chevy S10, and drove back the way we came. In the same spot we saw the Indian dude, he was still there. I remember thinking, that dude is crazy standing out there all day and into the night. What's he doing? Right as we passed him, we hear a loud bang on the back of the truck. At first I thought we hit an animal, but I hadn't felt anything that we'd run over. I turned around and looked out the back window. My brother started to slow down, thinking there may be something wrong with the truck. In the brake lights, I see the Indian guy chasing after us. We were easily going 55 to 60 at this point as we were about to stop. The guy is in the road, feet behind us. I scream at my brother to not stop. Gun it, man, gun it. He does, and being a Chevy S10, it had a speed governor on it at 80. 2 miles. 2 miles. This guy keeps up with us. We are seriously freaking out. I asked my brother, what if we don't make it back to town? Or what about when we have to slow down once we get close? After those 2 miles that stretched forever, I looked back, and he was gone. We got home, booked it into the house, and told our parents. Next morning, I get up to head somewhere and look at my brother's truck, thinking about the night before. I wondered what the loud bang was just before we started getting chased. Inspecting the trunk, I found a handprint smeared in the dust from about 2/3 over to the right, then smeared to the right taillight. I never went there again.